Hello people, hello YouTube. So this is episode 16 in How to Follow Jesus Christ. And so today's study is on a prophet like Moses. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18 to 19, Moses brought Israel the following promise of God. I will raise up from them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and will put my words in their mouth, and he shall speak to them all, and I will command him. And it shall be whoever who will not hear my words, in which he speaks in my name, I will require of him. In these words, Moses clearly established three facts. First, Moses described one particular prophet, whom God promises to send to Israel at a later time. The language that Moses used is singular throughout a prophet, his mouth, and he shall speak. These words cannot describe the later prophets in Israel as a whole. It must be to one special prophet. Second, this special prophet is to have unique authority above all others who has gone before him. If anyone in Israel refused to hear this prophet, God would bring judgment upon that person. Third, this prophet would be like Moses in ways that distinguish him from all other prophets that would come to Israel. In Acts chapter 3, verse 20-26, the Apostle Peter quoted these words of Moses and applied them directly to Jesus of Nazareth. A careful comparison of the Old and New Testament shows over 20 distinct points of resemblance between Moses and Jesus. The following questions regarding the similarities between these two prophets are grounded in three main headings: childhood, personal experiences, and ministry. So let us begin. Question 1. Name the Gentile empire who imposed his rule on Israel at the time of the birth of each of these prophets. Exodus chapter 1 verse 8 and 14 goes with Moses, so that would be Pharaoh. So Pharaoh imposed his rule on Israel when Moses was born. Luke chapter 2 verses 1-7 says Augustus, so Emperor Augustus, imposed his rule upon Israel when Jesus was born. Question 2. How were the lives of both Moses and Jesus endangered in their infancy? Exodus 1 verse 15 and 16 and Matthew chapter 2 verse 16 is their death, so they're in danger of being killed. Moses, he was in danger of being killed because he was a boy when he was born, and it was the same with Jesus because Herod wanted to kill all people under 2 years old. Question 3. By whose actions were their lives saved? Exodus chapter 2 verses 1-5, Hebrews chapter 11 verse 23, and Matthew chapter 2 verse 13 through to 14 says their parents. So the parents, Moses' parents saved Moses, and Jesus' parents saved him. Question 4. With what people did each find refuge for a time? Exodus chapter 2 through verse 10 and Matthew chapter 2 verses 14-15 is the people of Egypt. So with Moses, he was taken into the royal household, and Jesus, his parents and him moved to Egypt to escape from Herod. Question 5. What intellectual ability did each display? Acts chapter 7 verse 22 and Luke chapter 2 verses 46-47 and Matthew chapter 13 verse 54 says unusual wisdom and understanding. So they had wisdom and comprehension far beyond than their actual age. B. Their personal experiences. Name 2 character traits common to each man, so Moses and Jesus. Numbers chapter 12 verse 3 and 7, Matthew chapter 11 verse 29, and Hebrews chapter 3 verses 1-6 is they were humble and faithful. So Jesus and Moses never thought of themselves as more important than other people, and they were always faithful to the people that they loved. Question 7 says, were these prophets always received by Israel? Exodus chapter 2 verse 14 and 32 and 1, and Numbers chapter 16 verse 41, and John chapter 7 verse 52, and Matthew chapter 27 verses 21-22 is no. So these prophets, Jesus and Moses, were not received by Israel. Question 8. How did their brothers and sisters react to them at times? Numbers chapter 12 verse 1, Mark chapter 3 verse 21, and Matthew chapter 13 verses 54 through to 57, and John chapter 7 verse 3 to 5 says they rejected him. So the brothers and sisters of Moses and Jesus both rejected them. Question 9. How did each prophet respond before God in regard of their sin of Israel? Exodus chapter 32 verses 31 and 32, and Luke chapter 23 34 says, ask God to forgive them. So Jesus and Moses, every time the sin of Israel went to God, Moses and Jesus asked God to forgive Israel of their sins. Question 10. What was each willing to do to please God's wrath against the sin of the people? Exodus chapter 32 verses 31 to 32, and Luke chapter 23 verse 34 says they to die for the people's sins. So they were Moses and Jesus were willing to die for the people's sins. Question 11. What did each of these prophets do at a crucial point in their lives? Exodus chapter 34 verse 28 and Matthew chapter 4 verse 2 says they fasted for 40 days. So Jesus fasted for 40 days when he'd been baptized, and Moses fasted for 40 days as well. Question 12. Did each of these prophets enjoy special intimacy with God? Numbers chapter 12 verse 1 through 8, and John chapter 1 verse 18, and Matthew chapter 11 verse 27 says yes. So they each had a special intimacy, they had a very good relationship with God. Question 13. To what kind of place did each of these prophets go to have communion with God? Exodus chapter 24 verse 12 and Matthew chapter 17 verse 1 and 5 says a high mountain. So Moses went on to Mount Sinai and Jesus went on to a various high place or a high mountain wherever he was at the time. Question 14. Did they take any disciples with them? Exodus chapter 24 verse 13 and Matthew chapter 17 verse 1 says yes. Question 15. What effect did that experience have on their physical bodies? Exodus chapter 34 verse 29 and 30 and Matthew chapter 17 verse 2 says their faces shone. So they gave a display of God's image, because man is created in God's image. So by having that special intimacy with God and being in contact with God's very presence all the time, their faces shone and represented the glory of God. Question 16. In what special way did God speak to them on at least one occasion? Exodus chapter 19 verse 19 through to 20 and John chapter 12 verse 28 to 30 says God spoke to them in thunder. So I'm going to split the videos here and I'll see you in the next part. Bye.